Hi, I'm Katharine Zarrella, and we're live in the wee hours of New York Fashion Week after Pyer Moss's Spring Summer 20 collection. Pyer Moss is designed by Kerby Jean-Raymond, and he launched the line in 2013, but it's only been the last couple of years that he's gotten major recognition, from the industry and beyond. He won the 2018 CFDA Vogue Fashion Fund. He's been heralded by numerous editors as one of the most important designers working in New York right now. He's had a lot of red carpet success and has dressed people like Tracee Ellis Ross. And he was recently appointed as the artistic director of a new division of Reebok after he collaborated with the brand for 2 years. I think that, in addition to Kerby being a great designer and his clothing being, exciting from a fashion standpoint, one of the reasons that there is so much attention around Kerby right now is because he uses his collections and his runways as a platform to have important social conversations, to address social injustice, and to try and affect change. He's done this through particular garments, and he's done this through film and through performance. And his last 3 collections, the collection that we saw tonight was the third in a kind of linked trilogy of collections. His last 3 collections have really dealt with the Black experience in America. This collection was held in Flatbush, Brooklyn, which is kind of mid-Brooklyn below Prospect Park. And he held it at the King's Theater. And the reason why Kerby did his collection there is because he grew up in Brooklyn. And what he said backstage is that he feels as though oftentimes when Black people are really successful, they end up assimilating to the culture of whatever industry they're excelling in. And Kerby didn't want to do that. He thought that it was important to, really embrace where he grew up, and he wanted everyone to come to his, kind of hometown, if you will, to see his work and his collection. And the line was around the block, and there was, pushing and shoving, trying to get through security, but there wasn't like a lot of agitation. It was more that the excitement was palpable and the energy was really high. And you walked into the theater and it was this really, big, grand space, and there was a white elevated runway, and then the center of the runway there was a white piano, and there was a live band that played in the center of the runway, and then as behind the runway there was a huge gospel choir that provided the music for the show. And this show, it was called Sister, and it was called that after Sister Rosetta Tharpe, and she was the kind of godmother of rock and roll. And what Kerby told us backstage was that this collection was, in a sense, looking at what rock and roll might look like if it weren't appropriated by other people, and if there weren't kind of like a barrier of entry for marginalized communities or people of color to be able to rise to success in the rock and roll world. The collection, the silhouettes were really strong and oftentimes sharp. The colors were really vibrant. The first look was this color blocked white and yellow and fuchsia and black, 2-piece women's suit, and there were very, very strong shoulders, and the waist was nipped, and then it was these wide leg trousers with a big cuff, and it almost looked like something from the late 80s maybe, and it was a really bold piece look to start the collection with. Another look that I thought really stood out was this marigold silk gown, again with strong shoulders, but they kind of came to a point, and then the draping was very romantic. And I liked the contrast of, the strength and the kind of romantic femininity there. I think the most important section of the show was a collaboration with the artist Richard Phillips, and Richard Phillips was imprisoned for 45 years for a murder that he did not commit, and he was recently exonerated, and Kerby was really touched by his story and wanted to work with him on this collection. So Richard Phillips created these prints that were inspired by Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And one of my favorite pieces in that collection, or in that section, was a really well cut shift dress. And there was a guitar incorporated in the print, and kind of the body of the guitar sat on the hip of this shift, and it really emphasized the feminine form of the shift dress. So I thought that was successful on a lot of levels. The outerwear was also really strong. There was a kind of robin's egg blue menswear hooded parka done in, it might have been a vinyl or a lacquered leather, but it was kind of this high sheen material, and that really stood out. The puffer jackets that he did as part of the Reebok section of the collection were really strong. They were, approachable but cropped and had kind of a fashion interest to them. The logo leggings and the kind of like bodycon mock turtlenecks, I think are going to sell really well. There were certain parts of the collection where, I think that Kerby's really proven to us in seasons past that he's an incredibly skilled designer, and he can make technically spot-on clothing. And there were a few places in this collection where I thought the fit could have been better. There was a gown, a white gown, where the model really looked like she was swimming in the material. There were a couple of menswear looks that seemed unnecessarily stiff, and there was a bit of very literal interpretation of the theme, where there was like a guitar-shaped lapel or a guitar bag, and I thought that there might, it might have been more successful. It was a bit more subtlety there, but by and large, I think it would be great if next season Kerby focused, more on getting that perfect, fit, because he really has nailed it in the past. This was a huge collection, though. There were over 60 models, and it was an open casting. It was all models of color, and it was very diverse in body shape. It was a combination of people who had never modeled before and people who had a lot of modeling experience. And backstage, Kerby, kind of made a comment about how, could we tell like who was a model and who wasn't? And I think that, whether or not someone was a model was the last thing on people's mind during this collection, because the message was so strong. Kerby also collaborated with Sean John, and that too is kind of the third in a trilogy. He collaborated with Fubu previously, and also Casey Joe, and those were both kind of black-led brands that were very popular in the 90s, and he wanted to bring attention to these brands that were, incredibly financially successful and give them new life in the modern era. I think that this was a really emotional show, and the audience reacted as such. There were a lot of the audience was very vocal. Backstage, I heard more than one person say that this was the best thing ever. I think it really struck a chord with everyone who was in attendance. And I also think it's worth noting that Kerby didn't do a show last season. His last show was for spring 2019. And, backstage he was talking about how he's going to do collections when he's good and ready and when he feels like he has something that he wants to say. He's not going to adhere to the traditional ready-to-wear calendar and kind of the rat race that's been created. And I touched on this a little bit in my Tomo review, but I think the fashion industry has a tendency to become obsessed, a habit of becoming obsessed with young designers and giving them a lot of attention, and then pushing them too fast and too hard. And I think it's really important then and smart that Kerby's taking his time and doing things when he feels they're right. It's not unlike what Azzedine Elia did, and it worked out pretty well for him. So I hope that it'll work for Kerby too, and that the industry will allow him to take his time and continue to do really thoughtful, impactful collections when he feels the time is right. On the whole, I think that this collection really will resonate, and it was a really high energy, exciting experience, and I look forward to seeing what Kerby decides to do next, because he talked about doing another kind of trilogy of collections, or I believe what he said was he's not a one and done kind of guy. So we'll see more of these kind of connected collections in the future, and I look forward to learning when he's going to present the next one. See you next time.